The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a tragic and brutal event in French history, took place on August 24th, 1572. This massacre unfolded during the complex period of the French Wars of Religion, a series of conflicts fueled by religious, political, and social tensions between Catholics and Huguenots, French Calvinist Protestants, in 16th century France. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is often cited as one of the most infamous episodes of religious violence in Europe, symbolizing the peak of tensions between Protestant and Catholic factions and significantly impacting the course of French and European history. Background: the French war religion. The roots of the massacre lay within the broader context of the French Wars of Religion, which spanned from 1562 to 1598. France, a predominantly Catholic country, experienced increasing tensions as the Protestant Reformation spread across Europe. French Calvinists, known as Huguenots, were inspired by the teachings of John Calvin and established a growing Protestant community within France, especially among the nobility and urban populations. This religious divide exacerbated existing political rivalries within the French nobility, as powerful families aligned themselves with either the Catholic or Protestant cause. The Catholic Guise family, a dominant force in French politics, staunchly opposed the Huguenots. Meanwhile, members of the Bourbon family, who were related to the royal family and held significant political influence, became prominent supporters of the Huguenot cause. The French monarchy, under King Charles IX and heavily influenced by his mother, Catherine de' Medici, sought to balance these conflicting interests while maintaining control over a divided nation. The marriage of Henry of Navarre and Marguerite de Valois. In an attempt to ease religious tensions and unite the warring factions, Catherine de' Medici orchestrated a high-profile marriage between her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, a Catholic, and Henry of Navarre, the Protestant leader and a prominent Huguenot. The marriage, which took place on August 18, 1572, was intended as a symbol of reconciliation, bringing together the Catholic and Protestant factions at court. Many Huguenot leaders traveled to Paris to attend the wedding, viewing it as an opportunity for peace and cooperation. However, the underlying distrust between Catholics and Huguenots remained strong. Many Parisians, particularly devout Catholics, resented the presence of Protestant leaders in the city, and tensions simmered just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Catherine de' Medici and other Catholic leaders harbored suspicions about the Huguenot influence over King Charles IX, whom they believed was susceptible to Protestant persuasion. The assassination attempt on Admiral Coligny. Shortly after the wedding, tensions escalated dramatically when an assassination attempt was made on Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a respected Huguenot leader and a close advisor to King Charles IX. On August 22, 1572, Coligny was shot by a gunman believed to be connected to the Catholic faction, although the exact identity of the perpetrator remains uncertain. While Coligny survived the initial attack, he was severely wounded, and his survival inflamed the anger and fear among Huguenot leaders, who suspected a conspiracy orchestrated by Catholic hardliners. The assassination attempt on Coligny created a volatile atmosphere, as Huguenot nobles demanded justice and sought to protect themselves from potential Catholic retaliation. Catherine de' Medici, fearing Huguenot reprisals and worried about the influence of Coligny on her son, King Charles, sought a solution that would prevent a Huguenot uprising. Whether out of genuine fear, political calculation, or both, she resolved that decisive action was necessary to eliminate the perceived Huguenot threat. The massacre begins. In the early hours of August 24, 1572, on St. Bartholomew's Day, the massacre began with the targeted killing of prominent Huguenot leaders. Armed forces, acting on the orders of the royal court, stormed the residence of Admiral Coligny and executed him. His death marked the beginning of a coordinated assault on Huguenot leaders and supporters across Paris. The initial killings of Huguenot nobles and military leaders quickly spiraled into a broader wave of violence, as mobs of armed Parisians, driven by religious fervor and encouraged by radical Catholic leaders, began indiscriminately slaughtering Protestants. The massacre spread rapidly through the city as Catholic mobs attacked Huguenot homes, businesses, and places of worship. Entire families were killed, and bodies filled the streets of Paris. The violence was brutal and merciless, with men, women, and children all falling victim to the carnage. According to historical estimates, thousands of Huguenots were murdered in Paris within a matter of days. The massacre then spread beyond the capital as word of the event reached other parts of France, inciting further attacks against Huguenots in cities such as Toulouse, Lyon, and Bordeaux. By the end of the massacre, estimates suggest that between 5,000 and 30,000 Huguenots were killed across France. The role of King Charles IX. The role of King Charles IX in the massacre has been a subject of historical debate. Some historians argue that he was pressured into endorsing the massacre by his mother, Catherine de' Medici, and other Catholic advisors. Others believe that he was a willing participant, driven by a desire to consolidate his authority and eliminate the Huguenot threat. Regardless of his motivations, Charles ultimately sanctioned the killings, issuing orders for the mass execution of Huguenot leaders in Paris. Following the massacre, the royal court attempted to justify the violence, claiming that it was a preventive measure against a Huguenot coup. However, the scale and brutality of the massacre drew widespread condemnation from both Protestant and Catholic leaders outside France. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre became a symbol of the extreme religious intolerance and political violence that characterized the era, tarnishing the reputation of the French monarchy and deepening the divisions within French society. International reaction and the impact on Protestant Europe. The massacre sent shockwaves throughout Europe as Protestant communities across the continent reacted with horror and outrage. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre became a rallying point for Protestant leaders who viewed it as evidence of Catholic ruthlessness and a threat to religious freedom. In England, the massacre intensified anti-Catholic sentiment and reinforced Queen Elizabeth I's determination to protect Protestantism within her realm. The massacre also had a profound impact on the Dutch revolt, as Dutch Calvinists fighting against Spanish Catholic rule saw the event as further justification for their struggle. The massacre weakened France's standing in the eyes of Protestant nations and further isolated it from its Protestant allies. Meanwhile, within France, the massacre deepened the distrust between Catholics and Huguenots, making reconciliation even more difficult. The French Wars of Religion would continue for more than 2 decades, with both sides engaging in periodic bouts of violence and warfare, culminating in the Edict of Nantes in 1598, which granted limited religious tolerance to Huguenots and marked a temporary end to the conflict. The legacy of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre has endured as a stark example of the destructive power of religious hatred and intolerance. The massacre is often seen as a turning point in the history of religious conflict in France, highlighting the dangers of intertwining religious and political interests. It also served as a cautionary tale for European leaders, demonstrating the potential consequences of religious persecution and the importance of promoting tolerance and coexistence. The massacre remains a subject of historical study and reflection, illustrating the complexities of the religious and political landscape of 16th century France. It stands as a tragic reminder of the price of fanaticism and the need for peaceful resolution of ideological and religious differences. In literature and art, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre has been depicted as a symbol of Catholic oppression and the suffering of Protestants, reinforcing its legacy as one of the darkest chapters in French and European history. In summary, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572 was a catastrophic event fueled by a volatile combination of religious enmity and political ambition. The massacre, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of Huguenots, exposed the depths of religious intolerance in France and had lasting repercussions for the French monarchy and Protestant communities across Europe. It underscored the dangers of religious fanaticism and the urgent need for tolerance in a divided society.